If you want to support the channel, then please check out my Patreon page to gain access to exclusive videos, take part in Q&As, and watch my retrospectives before they go live on YouTube.
Let's get the obvious stuff out of the way.
You're not human, right? If I had to guess, I'd say you're a program from the machine world. But if that's true, that could mean you are part of this system, another kind of control. How can I trust you?
Bingo.
There is so much in this world that I do not understand. I have absolutely no idea how you were able to do some of the things you do. I only hope we understand that reason before it's too late.
As you are undoubtedly aware, it has become increasingly difficult to locate a secure broadcast position.
Squiddy's got all our best spots.
The main line, they're crawling with them.
In 72 hours, it's going to be 250,000 more.
Machines are tunneling to avoid our defense system. This is the same kind of attack we have defended for years. I urge the Council to realize the truth. This is the single greatest threat we have ever faced. And if we do not act accordingly, we will not survive.
I can't help it, Morpheus. I can't help thinking, what if you're wrong? What if all this, the prophecy, everything is bullshit?
Then tomorrow we may all be dead.
Mr. Anderson. Surprised to see me?
No.
You destroyed me, Mr. Anderson. Now here I stand because of you, Mr. Anderson. Because of you, I've changed. I'm unplugged. A new man, so to speak. Like you, apparently free.
Now there's more than one of them.
A lot more.
How is that possible?
I don't know. Somehow he's found a way to copy himself.
Now you fellas.
It's him,
The anomaly.
Do we proceed?
Yes, he is still.
Only human.
Upgrades. What happens if I fail?
Then Zion will fall.
I am the architect. I created the Matrix. I've been waiting for you.
The Matrix Reloaded exploded onto the big screen in May of 2003, produced on a massive budget of over $250 million, due to the second and third entry, The Matrix Revolutions, being shot back to back, and directed and written by the Wachowskis. It would gross over $750 million worldwide, and again became a massive hit on DVD. It was commercially the most successful R-rated movie in history at the time, though it would be surpassed by The Passion of the Christ less than a year later. The hype for the sequel had been building for over a year before its release. The first teaser trailer for The Matrix Reloaded was downloaded more than 2 million times in its first 72 hours of release on thematrix.com, topping records previously set by websites for The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. They had a tie-in promotion with Samsung to promote a new phone that was used in the film, as the first film focused on a Nokia that everyone wanted back in 1999. This new phone I don't recall anyone really wanting. The Matrix Reloaded and its sequel would be one of the rare instances that had spin-off media being directly linked to the sequels, with the video game Enter the Matrix, the Animatrix that had various numbers of animated shorts exploring the history of the Matrix and stories focused around other characters, and even comic books were published to expand this dark world of the future. The early reviews for the film from the fans highlighted it as being better than the first Matrix, and a number of critics had also shared similar views. Empire magazine awarded it 4 stars out of 5, calling it an unqualified triumph, praising its most astonishing action sequences that you are unlikely to see for a decade. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars out of 4. He described it as an immensely skillful sci-fi adventure, and praised the fact that it develops its world with more detail than the first movie was able to afford. But others felt differently, with some critics regarding the focus on the action as a detriment to the film's human elements, and the number of scenes with expository dialogue worked against the film. and the many unresolved subplots as well as the cliffhanger ending were also criticised. Once the general public went to see it, they were left confused by it, and not all fans felt a sequel was needed. Despite the movie's success, it would divide audiences, and it would end up somewhat damaging the franchise, as come the sequel in November of that year, the box office was almost half, as many had turned away. Reloaded would also get spoofed at the MTV Movie Awards due to its overly wordy and pretentious dialogue. Come 2006, Reloaded made the list of Entertainment Weekly's top 25 worst sequels ever made. After Revolutions came and went, the love for the Matrix franchise seemed to die out. 2003 was all about the Matrix, but people seem to have moved on quickly. The Wachowskis said they would never make a fourth film despite being pestered by Warner Brothers on a yearly basis. Lana Wachowski would finally give in and direct the fourth entry titled Resurrections, which was met with largely negative reviews and failed to make a fraction of the previous films at the box office. It's been nearly 20 years since Reloaded came out, and people have returned to it and started to appreciate what the Wachowskis were trying to do. The often confusing story about the Matrix and Neo's importance seemed more clear on repeated viewing, and the thought of it being a terrible sequel seems to have been forgotten about, and some fans have slowly come round to appreciating it. The Wachowskis apparently envisioned the epic story they unleashed in The Matrix as a trilogy, and approached the production of the second and third installments as a single film that would be presented in two parts. Going through the film's original production notes, the Wachowskis explained the first film was machines versus humans. Humans are trying to free themselves from the world of the Matrix, where the machines have enslaved them. In Reloaded and Revolutions, you see the perspective of machine-created programs trying to hide in the Matrix when they face deletion in the machine world, while the humans face extinction by the machines who are trying to destroy Zion. Ultimately, the machine's survival is threatened as well, and the humans, programs and machines have to find a way to cooperate to ensure their survival. They also wanted to tap into the idea of choice being an illusion, and with Neo having these godlike powers, how was he going to deal with being seen as this saviour to the remaining humans of Zion? If you look back to this period before the Wachowskis transitioned, they were incredibly shy and rarely did interviews, so the process of trying to discover the building blocks of their ideas for Reloaded and Revolutions is a little unclear, as producer Joel Silver became the voice of the Wachowskis for all the PR and behind the scenes material, and would talk about these sequels in a very salesman-like way, because that was what he was good at. But it also raised a question for some about this idea of the Wachowskis envisioning this series as a trilogy, and it seemed more of a push by the studio who wanted a sequel. In an interview with Starlog magazine, Silver explained the ideas for the sequels and spin-off media, saying the Wachowskis felt that if they could make The Matrix available in other ways, the fanbase could seek out and find this other material that would add to the enjoyment of the future movies. If fans don't see the other material, it won't harm their appreciation of the films. On their visit to Tokyo in 1999 to promote the first film, the Wachowskis met with loads of directors of anime to discuss some ideas and show appreciation for their work, and on the flight back they mapped out this idea of the movie, video game, anime and how they interact together. They had a year and a half to prep the picture in California when the movie came together on paper. The Wachowskis planned everything in minute detail to avoid any problems on set, and Jeff Darrow, the conceptual artist, had to figure out what Zion looked like, and expanding on the world of the machines that would have a larger role come Revolutions. Now, filming two movies back to back wasn't entirely uncommon. Famously, it happened on Superman 1 and 2, and more recently Peter Jackson had decided to shoot the Lord of the Rings trilogy in the same manner. But with Reloaded and Revolutions, it would also have the story be expanded in other forms of media, which was a very new idea for the time. Joel Silver said whatever the cost these sequels will be, it's worth every penny. Joel had admitted he had made a lot of dumb action movies over the years, and The Matrix was a smart movie that could be enjoyed for its action or for its deeper philosophical ideas, and everyone was anxious to see the continuation of this story. When it came to casting, all of the original cast members signed on without even reading the script, and when it came to bringing on new actors, they all jumped at the chance. The Matrix was a huge hit, and turning a role down in the sequel would seem bonkers, and many of these supporting roles went to local talent in Australia. As the cast of characters is heavily expanded for Reloaded, I'm not going to go through all of them, and only focus on the ones that are integral to Reloaded, and the others I will explore later in a review of Revolutions. Keanu Reeves would be paid handsomely when he came back to reprise his role, and he would take a share in its profits. He was eventually paid a whopping $114 million, making him the most bankable star at the time. Keanu has been known for being extremely generous and kind, and gave a lot of his money to the special effects and makeup departments of the film, and even charities, especially at the time as his sister was suffering from leukemia. Reeves was in the best shape he had ever been on the sequels, being on a strict diet to maintain a 7.5% body fat. Gloria Foster would return as the Oracle, but didn't finish filming her role as she sadly died of complications related to diabetes early into the production. She had filmed her scenes for Reloaded, but was yet to complete her work on Revolutions. Jada Pinkett Smith was offered the role of Niobe. Jada was 9 months pregnant when she received a call from her agent informing her that she was being considered for the role, and eventually she would take part, and didn't realise the amount of training she would have to do. Despite her role seemingly cut short in Reloaded, she would feature heavily in the Enter the Matrix video game, along with fellow cast member Anthony Wong as Ghost. Stuntman turned actor Colin Chow plays Seraph, a role originally considered for Jet Li, who sadly turned down the part. Seraph is the bodyguard to the Oracle. Lambert Wilson, a big star of French cinema, plays the Merovingian, an older program within the Matrix, who holds the Keymaker hostage, and who is vital for Neo to get to the source to end the war. Lambert would return to the series for the 4th entry in Matrix Resurrections. Monica Bellucci was cast as Persephone, the wife of the Merovingian. She was cast after the Wachowskis liked her performance in Milena. Monica had worked with Keanu before on Bram Stoker's Dracula. Monica would also have her role expanded in the video game. Helmut Bakaitis plays the architect who created The Matrix. Helmut was a familiar face of Australian TV and appeared later in Hacksaw Ridge. This role was originally considered for Sir Sean Connery, but he turned it down because he couldn't understand the concept of the movie and chose to star in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen instead. Randall Duck Kim plays the Keymaker, who can open a door to any part of the Matrix, and the one person for Neo to reach the source. The Keymaker would have additional scenes included in Enter the Matrix as he encounters Niobe and Ghost. Randall provided his voice in Kung Fu Panda and appeared in The Last Airbender and John Wick 3. Harold Perrineau is cast as Link, replacing the role of Tank played by Marcus Chong, who had a falling out with the Wachowskis and the studio. His part was written out and the character was killed off-screen. Officially, Chong was not asked back because salary negotiations between him and the studio had broken down. Neil and Adrian Raymond play as the twins, who are programs within the Matrix who can essentially turn into ghosts and can avoid being hurt in combat. But outside of the films, their careers as actors didn't really take off. With Agent Smith now operating as a rogue program in the Matrix, we have new agents to battle Neo. Daniel Bernhardt gets the most screen time as Agent Johnson. Daniel may be a familiar face to action fans, having starred in Bloodsport 2 and 3, Logan, John Wick and Birds of Prey. Ian Bliss plays as Bane, who is taken over by Agent Smith as he attempts to escape from the Matrix. Bane would have a larger role come Revolutions. Henry Lennox, a familiar face of TV and film, plays Commander Locke, who heads up the army to defend Zion, and is in a relationship with Niobe, and does not believe in the prophecy pushed by Morpheus. Harry appeared recently in the Superman films as General Swanwick, and as the Martian Manhunter in Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League. Anthony Zerber plays as Councillor Hammond. Anthony has been acting for years, appearing in movies like The Omega Man, Steel Dawn, License to Kill and Star Trek Insurrection. And finally we have Clayton Watson, who is referred to as Kid. Clayton, like many of the supporting actors, appeared on Australian TV in the popular soaps such as Home and Away and Neighbours. His role would also get expanded in Revolutions, but his backstory is explained in the Animatrix. The production team would return to Fox Studios in Australia to film Reloaded and Revolutions, with some sequences being shot in California in the USA. With filming starting in March of 2001, it would end in August of 2002, so over a year of filming. Pre-production on the two films lasted for a year, the shooting took a year, and then both films spent a year in post-production. The core of the cast would have to train for 8 months starting in November of 2000. Pretty much most Hollywood productions that would have extensive fight scenes would never consider having their cast trained for that long, but the Wachowskis were following what Hong Kong cinema were doing, and Keanu, Carrie, Lawrence and Hugo were trained to such a degree they would look like professionals. But it wasn't all easy, as Carrie broke her leg very early on into training and Lawrence sustained an injury. Keanu was recovering from surgery from when he was filming the first film. Beforehand, it made it difficult for him to do any high-flying kicks. Once he recovered, his fighting style would incorporate a lot more kicks to show off more of his fighting techniques. If you own the DVD or Blu-ray etc., a lot of the extra material included as special features were dedicated to 2 of the big action sequences. The Burly Brawl, which would have Neo take on dozens of Agent Smiths, which had Hugo doubled by 13 other stuntmen. This scene was filmed at a decommissioned naval air station in California. For the freeway chase, they constructed a 1.5-mile freeway on the old runways, specifically for the film, which was an incredible sequence and at the time a big surprise to see them make their own freeway, and it just demonstrated the large amount of money being thrown at the sequel. The production would be very stressful for many involved, especially with shooting 2 movies at once. Cinematographer Bill Pope, who would get a cameo in Reloaded, later revealed the exhaustive nature of the Reloaded and Revolution shoot, saying that everything that was good about the first experience was not good about the last 2. Pope said, "We weren't free anymore, people were looking at you. There was a lot of pressure. In my heart, I didn't like them. I felt we should be going in another direction. There's a lot of friction and a lot of personal problems, and it showed up on screen, to be honest with you. It was not my most elevated moment, nor was it anyone else's. The Wachowskis had read this damn book about Stanley Kubrick that said, actors don't do natural performances until you wear them out. So let's go to take 90. This may be a good reason as to why he didn't work for the Wachowskis again on their future productions." With the film's plot, it's apparently set 6 months after the events of The Matrix, and Neo is being haunted by nightmares of the future, and Trinity's death, who he is now romantically involved with. Morpheus receives a message from Captain Niobe, calling an emergency meeting of all ships of Zion. It has now become increasingly difficult to broadcast messages as the Sentinels are drawing closer to the city, and their numbers are increasing in the safe areas. Reports indicate that Zion will be attacked in under 72 hours. Commander Locke orders all ships to return to Zion to prepare for the onslaught, but Morpheus asks one ship to remain to contact the Oracle. Agent Smith has returned but is now unplugged from the system and operating as a rogue program, and is multiplying throughout the system, and takes over Bane as he attempts to flee into the real world, and in the process Smith takes over his real body. Neo is informed the Oracle needs to speak with him, but first he must get past her bodyguard to prove that he is the real Neo. It's revealed that the Oracle is part of the system. Neo asks how he can trust her. She replies that this is his decision. The Oracle instructs Neo to reach the source of the Matrix with the help of the Keymaker, who is being held prisoner. As the Oracle departs, Smith appears and his vast copies attack, and an epic fight ensues. Neo escapes and continues with the Oracle's mission, with Trinity and Morpheus as they head to meet an old program, the Merovingian, who will not give up the Keymaker. They are, however, given a helping hand by his wife, but escaping won't come easy. Once the Keymaker is free, he explains that getting to the source will be extremely difficult, and Neo knows his nightmare is coming true. The first Matrix blew people away with its visual effects, especially with the bullet time sequence. That would get copied in other movies and often spoofed. Come the sequel, the Wachowskis moved away from that technique as it had been done to death, but also the process of setting up hundreds of cameras for one shot wasn't going to be very practical. The big sequence they wanted, having 100 Agent Smiths attacking Neo, was an extremely ambitious scene, which some felt couldn't be done. A new FX technique was created called virtual cinematography, which allowed Agent Smith to be in 100 places at once. Of course, only one is actor weaving, the rest are 3-dimensional photorealistic digital copies with stunt doubles. They developed universal capture, a process which samples and stores facial details and expressions at high resolution, then captures expressions from Reeves and weaving using a multi-camera setup, similar to the bullet time rig, called optical flow. The big fight is very impressive, but you start to see limitations of the technology, even at the time on first viewing. Once Neo and Agent Smith become CG doubles, it's very obvious, and they move and jump around in a very floaty fashion and look a bit rubbery. Seeing the twins transform into these ghost-like figures, I never felt worked particularly well. They seem to move at this very strange frame rate. The visual concept for them doesn't seem to fit in the Matrix. To me, conceptually, they don't really work. Of course, the motorway sequence still holds up even in 4K, when we see these cars slowly get crushed as the agents jump on them and the big battle comes to an end as the two lorries collide and explode in slow motion. Seeing that on the big screen was pretty mind-blowing at the time, and seeing Neo save Morpheus and the Keymaker at the last second was pretty nail-biting. Once Neo flies past, the CG double again looks a bit rubbery, and his arms oddly look really long. One of my favourite moments is seeing Neo flying to save Trinity at lightning speed. They make the right decision of keeping Neo in focus, where the background is blurred as he pulls along dozens of cars and rubble behind him, and you can see the reflection of light on his shades flash as he flies faster and faster. It's a great flying shot, and he saves her in true Superman fashion just in time. Despite some limitations of the technology replicating humans to a believable standard, for the most part the effects still hold up extremely well after 20 years. Composer Don Davis returns for the sequel and of course Revolutions. The Wachowskis and Davis wanted to make sure there was a continuity between the three pictures. They weren't interested in abandoning what had been established in the first movie and wanted to expand upon it. Don was looking to see how he could take those motifs and postmodern concepts and pursue something bigger and more ambitious. When Davis read the script, he felt exhausted and got a great sense of the scale Reloaded and Revolutions would take, and he knew the enormous challenge ahead of him, especially for the lengthy motorway sequence. The Wachowskis were very interested integrating the orchestral elements and electronica music with the help of Paul Oakenfold and Ben Watkins. They didn't feel that the needle drop idea was going to benefit the film. Jumping from one style of music to another wasn't going to cut it. For example, the Burly Brawl where Neo takes on dozens of Agent Smiths. Juno reactor's Ben Watkins had to fit his music with what Don had composed, some cases taking MIDI tracks of the cues and then making them match the tempo. One of the collaborations, Mona Lisa Overdrive, is titled in reference to the cyberpunk novel of the same name by William Gibson, and a major influence on the directors would dominate the big motorway sequence. With Davis's orchestrations added, it made for an incredible piece of action-driven music. As with its predecessor, many tracks by external musicians are featured in the movie, though only in the closing credits. Many of the musicians included, for example, Rob Zombie, Rage Against the Machine, Marilyn Manson, who all appeared on the soundtrack for the first film. The score got released on CD at the time, containing 2 CDs. One featured all the songs featured in the film, and others that didn't make the cut but were inspired by Reloaded, and the second CD had 7 tracks of Don Davis's work. Later there would be a 2 CD set for The Matrix Reloaded focused solely on the score, containing the complete music and additional cues that got left out for whatever reason. This CD set from 2013 is no longer in print, but the original album is still floating around online for cheap prices and includes some good tracks of Don Davis's material. This score is a brilliant example of combining electronic and orchestral music, and it delivers on the big ideas the sequel brings to the table. Enter the Matrix was designed, like the Animatrix, to be an integral part of the Matrix world. The game would feature exclusive footage written and directed specifically for the game by the Wachowskis. The game was developed by Shiny Entertainment, who would make use of motion capture from the film's actors and stunt doubles under the supervision of the series' fight scene choreographer. Arriving on the PS2, PC, Xbox, and eventually the GameCube. The story is essentially a B-side to the events of Reloaded, where the player can select Niobe or Ghost. It has them retrieving a package left in the Matrix. After being pursued by agents, Ghost and Niobe escape with the package, which turns out to be a message to the human city Zion, warning them that the machines are approaching with an army of sentinels. Niobe and Ghost are tasked with calling the rest of the ships back to Zion to coordinate a defense. Players can play as either Niobe or Ghost, each of whom have slight variations during their story. Most levels involve controlling players in a third-person perspective using guns and fighting skills, which are quite deep once you've learned to get your head around the different techniques and the usual objectives to complete your missions. At any time, players can activate bullet time, called Focus in the game, which slows down time, giving players the ability to perform actions such as shooting in midair and dodging bullets, very much like in the film. The reviews were mixed upon release. I used to work at a video game store during this time, and the pre-orders were pretty strong, but not long after its release, copies were being traded in, as gamers had got bored of it. Critics on the time said the game suffers from repetition, but having the option to play as 2 different characters offered a lot of replay value. IGN felt things could have been much better with a few more months in development. That was a common complaint, as many felt the game felt unfinished in areas, with clunky controls, graphics appearing incomplete, and not playing as Neo was a bit of a downer for some, but it did offer a lot to expand on the events of The Matrix Reloaded. I never got round to playing it at the time, I think down to my friends being somewhat disappointed by it. Getting a chance a few years later, I found the idea of it taking place at the same time as Reloaded was a novel idea that does work. But Ghost and Niobe are not interesting characters, they just look bored during their scenes, and having to control these dull heroes, it makes for a less engaging experience on the story side of things. Having played Stranglehold and the likes of Max Payne 3, the bullet time sequences just aren't as fun as these later titles. If you are a fan of the sequels, I'm sure you've probably given it a go, but for those who are somewhat intrigued by it, it's certainly worth playing as it's really cheap secondhand because no one wants it, and it's not a collectible on that generation of consoles. I think like many of us, we were super excited to see The Matrix Reloaded. By this point everyone pretty much had a copy of The Matrix on DVD, with it being one of the main reasons to jump on the new video format, and for those who hadn't seen it at the cinema, had watched it at home, and the awareness had doubled, giving the hype for the sequel being through the roof. The early press for Reloaded seemed very positive. I still remember seeing MTV News covering its release, with fans walking out the cinema declaring it was better than the first one, which got me even more pumped to watch it. Of course, I've learnt my lesson now, to not fully trust early reactions to movies, especially from the fans. So finally the time came and I watched it, and to be honest, I didn't really like the film on first viewing. Of course, the action sequences were extremely impressive. Neo takes part in a lot of lengthy fights that are choreographed to a very high standard, with Keanu matching the efforts of many Hong Kong action stars. But between each fight scene or lengthy action sequence, we were given long-winded discussions on choice, programs within the Matrix, causality and effect, and Neo constantly asking the question of why. We also discover that this is the 6th time this has happened, with the humans battling the machines, with Neo returning to the source, which left people confused or just baffled why the Wachowskis went in this direction. The first film gave us some glimpses of the future and the Machine City. We are told about Zion but not shown anything, so a lot of questions were raised about the real world, and fans and audiences alike left a lot of it to their own imagination to fill in the gaps, or if a sequel was made, they could have some idea of where things would go. Many also felt that The Matrix wasn't conceived as a trilogy. The first film had a clear start, middle and end. It is left open for a sequel to happen, of course, but it very much stands as a single movie. Come Reloaded, it's part 1 of a 2-part act, so the film doesn't have the benefit of a start, middle and end. It's very much a start and a middle act, which results in a strange viewing experience. The film has a strange pace to it. It seems to plod along in a non-traditional way. We have a lengthy dialogue scene, big fight, dialogue, dialogue, and then it ends. It feels very blocky with its structure, feeling like a very different experience to the first film. Weirdly, with its constant dumps of exposition, it felt like the Star Wars prequels. Very static shots with people sitting down, having a chat or standing still. And of course they are wearing shades in the dark, which is a bit stupid. Bill Pope again brings a great visual style to the movie, but we are seeing less camera movement with the dialogue scenes, so it feels like everything grinds to a halt once the action finishes. We are introduced to loads of new characters on Zion, who really have little bearing on the story in Reloaded, as it's all lead up to revolutions that would have them take part in the battle with the machines, or others are deployed to support the cause of Neo. So a lot of time seems wasted in dedicating scenes to these characters, especially to the unnecessarily long dance number 30 minutes into the movie. The audience is there for Neo and how he is going to save the world. Agent Smith returns, which was to be expected, but they ruin that surprise 10 minutes into the movie. When Smith encounters Neo, he says, "Are you surprised to see me?" And Neo says no. Well, of course, because you gave away your identity very early on, you bozo. With all these characters they introduce, everyone is just miserable. There is little humour throughout. Neo has this huge responsibility on his shoulders, and he is this Christ-like figure, so I can understand why he plays his part very straight. But everyone else kind of does the same, making most of the cast somewhat unlikable, or we just end up not caring about them. The emotional angle is missing. It's sold as this love story between Trinity and Neo, which is kind of there to be invested in, but you want the audience to care about the humans' plight and their eventual destruction, but halfway into it, I found myself disconnected emotionally. The plot is set 6 months after the events of the first film, but you don't get that impression, considering Neo and Trinity are desperate to have some free time to get jiggy with it in a slow, sweaty sex scene. As time has passed, Neo has freed people from the Matrix, such as the Kid. Looking back, I think part 2 should have been Neo saving people from the system, and then discovering by the end that this has happened all before, or just avoid that idea and just have him encounter the architect, who leaves him with a difficult choice. A lot of the runtime of part 2 is just dumps of very wordy dialogue, really coming across as trying to be overly smart, which I think confused a lot of the general moviegoers who wanted to follow the film like the first one with a smart but simple narrative. The first film opened up your mind to new ideas, but it was simple to follow. You didn't need to be overly familiar with the sci-fi genre or the philosophical ideas it presents, and the questioning of one's own reality. The sequel just gets lost in its own ideas. You feel yourself going round in circles, making it difficult to keep track of everything. It boils down to the script taking too long to make its point. Things really needed to be streamlined so more time could have been dedicated to the wider world of the Matrix. When you think about the plot in Reloaded, not much really happens. Neo and Trinity need to find the keymaker to get to the source, which to Neo's surprise he is confronted by the architect and is told the truth about the Matrix. That's kind of it. Then it's padded out with, to be honest, fantastic action scenes, but the story comes to a grinding halt for these punch-ups to happen, which is inherent in all martial arts movies, but with the Matrix dealing with big lofty ideas, a finer balance should have been considered. The film just ends abruptly, which I remember on my first viewing this audible grumbling from the audience. We didn't have to wait a year or two for a sequel, it came around 6 months later or so, but with how it's structured it felt very underwhelming how it ended. I didn't have that exciting feeling to find out what's going to happen. In my mind I was just annoyed with how things played out. To judge Reloaded by itself you could say is a little unfair in retrospect, because it's half of the main story. If you watch part 2 and 3 together, it all makes sense. But when you look back at say Empire Strikes Back, Back to the Future Part 2 or even say The Two Towers, they both have clear 3-act structures despite being the middle act of one main story. Reloaded just feels like a clunky first act that doesn't really have a clear idea where it's going. It's like most of the story is in revolutions. Reloaded just feels strung together with fight scenes and convoluted moments of dialogue. I have friends who refuse to accept there are sequels to The Matrix. Others I know felt Reloaded and Revolutions destroyed their love for the franchise. And others are the complete opposite. They love the direction it went in, but for some to say declare it a terrible sequel, for example, is a bit of a stretch. It certainly delivers on the action front, and despite the long-winded dialogue scenes, they can be somewhat enjoyable to an extent, because the performances are very impressive. In particular the architect scene. The actor delivers these tough speeches effortlessly despite him probably not really knowing what he is talking about. But it is, I suppose, an iconic scene, but Reloaded lacks the rewatchability of the first one. If you watch Reloaded, then you have to watch Revolutions to have any finale, then you've got to dedicate over 4 hours to it. We can slap on Empire Strikes Back as a standalone watch, but Reloaded doesn't have that advantage for me in that respect. It's a highly ambitious sequel that doesn't stick to the formula of traditional cinematic storytelling. You could say they were quite bold to go in this direction, but there are often reasons why filmmakers stick to the traditional rules when it comes to telling their story, because you want the audience engaged in the film, and they desire some sort of finale even when the film is a middle act story. I certainly don't dislike the film, even though after 20 years I'm still a bit baffled the Wachowskis went this way for the sequels. It's not how I thought the story would go. To give them credit, it's not predictable, it does something entirely different, but that necessarily doesn't make it a great movie. It's an interesting but flawed sequel that gets lost in its own ideas and forgets about the audience who want to be entertained and not lectured on choice and control. There's a fine balance of enlightening your audience and giving them enough to walk away happy with. But Reloaded goes in the opposite direction and drags throughout to get its message across.
There is a building. Inside this building, there is a level where no elevator can go, and no stair can reach. This level is filled with doors. These doors lead to many places, hidden places. But one door is special. One door leads to the source.
How do you know all this?
I know because I must know. It is my purpose. It is the reason I'm here. The same reason we're all here.
I'm sorry, this is a dead end.
A program was written to watch over the trees and the wind, the sunrise and sunset. That program's running all over the place. The ones doing their job, doing what they were meant to do, are invisible. You never even know they were here. But the other ones, you hear about them all the time.
I've never heard of them.
Of course you have. Every time you've heard someone say they saw a ghost or an angel.
That's a nice trick.
It's the system assimilating some program that's doing something they're not supposed to be doing. Usually, a program chooses exile when it faces deletion.
And why would a program be deleted?
Maybe it breaks down. And when it does, a program can either choose to hide here or return to the source, where you must go, where the path of the one ends.
There are two doors. The door to your right leads to the source and the salvation of Zion. The door to your left leads back to the Matrix, to her and to the end of your species. But rest assured, this will be the 6th time we have destroyed it, and we have become exceedingly efficient at it. Quintessential human delusion, simultaneously the source of your greatest strength and your greatest weakness.
If I were you, I would hope that we don't meet again.
We won't.